folks, and welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. For today, all things magic they're going to include sorting some cards and telling some stories. It's not going to include deck techs. It's not going to include product openings. It's not going to include reviews of products or any kind of rewards. We are just going to swap some memories and we are going to sort out some cards. Now, this is Tales from MTG Burgeoning LGS edition. And when we last left off, we were talking about seasons during my LGS EDH League. And we talked about the last time, we talked about the full season 2 and just coming up short with Isamaru. That brought us to season 3. And if you have been following along at home, you know what the previous 2 decks were for the first 2 full seasons I participated in my LGS's EDH League. If you did not and have not, check them out. Season 1, I went with Xenagos, which was a Gruul build. Season 2, I went with Mono White Isamaru Voltron. So from Mono White, I think I had my fill of mono color builds because I went the exact opposite extreme and decided to bring out a 5-color Scion of the Dragon deck. Now this was quite a path for this deck. It began as just Dragon good stuff during my metagame with my playgroup of many, many years. And after some refinement and some play testing and a little more, fine-tooth combing of what I wanted the deck to be, it gradually evolved from a Dragon good stuff to a deck that would end up completely changing the landscape of my LGS. And I am not trying to state that in a boastful way. I am not trying to become some kind of egotistical, the end-all and hear-all of all Magic players. I am merely echoing what was told to me during my time, during my 3rd full season in the EDH League at my LGS. So before we continue, this Scion deck, other players, were losing their minds over this deck. And a week never went by when I was participating in my pods, either the first pods of the night or the night-ending pods. A week didn't go by where a player didn't seek out a judge in order to have the judge explain an interaction that was happening with Scion that the players believed I was either misunderstanding or I was doing wrong. So this is how it works. When you are playing with Scion of the Dragon as your commander, the physical entity of the card, the actual piece of cardboard, is your commander. And once Scion changes into a different dragon, because that's what he does, it's his ability, you tap 2, you search your library for a dragon creature card, you put it into your graveyard, and Scion of the Dragon becomes a copy of that dragon until end of turn. When Scion activates that ability and he becomes a copy of that dragon is imprinted on the physical cardboard itself, meaning that piece of cardboard is still the commander. And that was the greatest source of confusion amongst players in the league, is that if your commander is Scion and you switch him to the Dragon Tyrant, you're not dealing 12 points of commander damage to me, you're just dealing 12 points of combat damage. No, that's not how that ends up working. And like I said, people were losing their minds over this. And that was just the beginning. When there was more of these Scion interactions, like the very few times, and this was not something that happened with any degree of regularity. This was just a little mini package that was inserted into the Scion deck to, just ward off any players who were trying to warp the table or take the table hostage, or any blue mages that just had to go. I did have in the Scion deck, and still do to this day, the Molten Steel Dragon Skithiryx Blight Dragon combo. And how that ends up working is you activate Scion's ability, and while it's on the stack, and let me say that again. You activate Scion's ability, and in response to it, you activate it again. Both of those triggers go onto the stack. When the first one comes off the stack, you search your library to become the Molten Steel Dragon. And then after that resolves, the Molten Steel Dragon becomes a copy of Scion, but there's still another trigger on the stack. So before the second trigger begins to resolve, you either tap the red mana or pay the life for the Phyrexian mana to give that Scion creature +6/+0 until end of turn. You can do that in any combination of ways. You either have the red mana to tap it, or you just pay the life. More often than not, I was just paying the life, because Scion can be a pretty mana-intensive commander. So you pay the life or get +6 however you can. And then after the first one is completely resolving and you're moving to the second trigger, that comes off of the stack, and then Scion will become a copy of Skithiryx, the Blight Dragon. And then because Skithiryx is 4/4 with Infect, and you gave the physical cardboard itself +6/+0 until end of turn, now you have a 10/4 flying Infector that all it has to do is strike an opponent to deal 10 poison counters, and that player loses the game. So that was another interaction with Scion that players, they were losing their minds about this. They could not grasp it. I did not understand. I had no idea it was going to be such a complicated thing for some of the player base. These are some seasoned players. I understand some of the newbies that are just getting into the game, but there were a lot of seasoned players there that were just not catching on. Additionally, that wasn't the only interaction that seemed to cause the most trouble. There was also one where by targeting Scion with the kicked Rite of Replication, Scion is just sitting there on the battlefield, and you tap the mana to cast a Rite of Replication kicked, and then you, in response, you activate Scion's ability. You search your library to change Scion into another dragon until end of turn. So when you make that dragon, say for example, Scourge of Vulgus, and when the Rite of Replication identifies the target and puts the 5 copies of Scourge of Vulgus into play, well, that ends up dealing in 6 points of damage at a time times 3, 180 total points of damage. And again, the judges would have to be called, because it's like, how does this happen? The dragons all come into play and they see themselves at the same time. That's what the spell does, and because they're able to see each other enter the battlefield all at the same time, they're able to accumulate all of those ETB triggers. That was another one that was a beautiful one. Well, it was beautiful for me, not so much for the people in my pods. Do the same thing with the Rite of Replication, but target Yosei, the Morning Star, or target Kokusho, the Evening Star. And again, players were thinking to themselves, well, these dragons are going to die. You are not going to get your death triggers, because as soon as they come into play, the legend rule applies, and you have to pick some to die. And yeah, I do have to do that. They definitely do die, but they are recognized as entering the battlefield, and we do get those death triggers. So that ends up happening too. So again, it was such a rarity that I would go a week without someone pulling one of the judges over from the store to have a rule or an interaction explained. So it just started to become commonplace. So anyways, let's stop digressing with the interactions there and just get to the meat and potatoes of this discussion. Scion of the Ur-Dragon during this season was the most successful season I had ever had at my LGS for the league, for the EDH League. I never, in any of my other years there, in any of my other seasons there, I never accumulated so many points. I never accumulated so much store credit. By the time the season was over, I was able to cash in store credit for a Vampiric Tutor, my very first one. I had never had a Vampiric Tutor before, in addition to a bunch of other cards too. Now, I would end up placing number 1 in the points for that season because, like I said, Scion, it was just, I mean, again, this isn't one of those situations where I'm trying to be overly boastful or toot my horn. Scion was just unstoppable during that season. It could not be stopped. And I didn't even get into all of the different graveyard interactions I had with when I would have Living Death in play, or Patriarch's Bidding, or Rise of the Dark Realms. In fact, I remember casting Patriarch's Bidding for the first time in that deck in one of my pods, and so many players didn't even know that that card existed, which, from a foreshadowing standpoint, ends up being very unfortunate later on in this story. However, so Scion, just unstoppable. I never accumulated more points in a season, and I never accumulated more store credit in previous seasons or future seasons than with this Scion deck. It was a work of art. It was just masterful. And so number 1 in my pod, or let me reframe that, number 1 in the Invitational at the end of the season, get to my first pod, just fly right through the pod. I mean, they knew. I mean, I don't switch the decks. Like I said back before, during other other episodes of this series, when I would pick a deck for my EDH League, it was the same deck for the whole season. I would not switch it. I would just keep playing with it, refining it, just, refining it, changing it, doing whatever I needed to do. So it's not like it was a surprise that I was coming, and I was still able to just fly right through that first table. So then I got to the championship pod. My third straight. 3 seasons in, 3 final tables. But alas, we ran out of fuel, and we just couldn't get it done in that last pod. And going back to when I was saying earlier about the foreshadowing, the unfortunate foreshadowing, well, apparently one of the players that had first discovered the card Patriarch's Bidding was one of the players that was sitting at the final table with me. And he would end up putting a copy of Patriarch's Bidding in his Dimir zombie deck. And once his graveyard was full, now I didn't realize this at the time, of course, but once his graveyard was nice and filled, he would cast the Patriarch's Bidding. Here I thought I would be okay getting a dragon or 2 back. However, I failed to realize that the Grey Merchant of Asphodel was in the graveyard, along with a choice number of other zombies, all with so many black swamp mana symbols. So even though I fell short in my bid to recapture my LGS's store championship in the EDH League, I will still contend, and I will never waver from this, and, unless something different happens in the future, but I will never waver that season, that Scion deck, was the most successful season I have ever had participating in my store's LGS EDH League. And that is going to do it for this story, folks. This is MTG Burgeoning, and we are reminiscing.